metaphysical, linguistic objects.
Greetings from Cybergelic Space. This is Lorenzo, and I'm your host here in the Psychedelic Salon. And if you like to think of it this way, today's podcast is being brought to you by Coratum, Corey H., an anonymous Bitcoin donor, and John P., all of whom have made donations to the salon in the past week to help pay some of the expenses associated with these podcasts. And I thank you all very much. Also, I should say that I'm a little behind in sending out personal thank you emails to our donors this month. The fact is that besides being somewhat lazy and also not being a very big fan of email, well, it's been too hot until today for me to even turn my computer on for a while. This little room that I call the salon gets quite warm even without my big computer running, and well, so the machine and I just justify taking a few days off whenever there's a heat wave. Thus, no emails from me lately. Of course, that doesn't justify the fact that I'm also about 6 weeks behind in responding to some of the emails that have been coming in through the comments section of our website. But please don't give up on me. I have the best of intentions to answer those as well. And hopefully I'll get that done before the end of this month. For what it's worth, however, I do read them as they come in. It's just that when an email comes in with a question that's going to take a while for me to answer, well, then it becomes kind of a roadblock that stops me from answering the next one and the next one and so forth. So, well, you see what you have to deal with here. I guess the next thing, I'll be outside yelling at kids to get off my lawn. I hope you know that's a joke. So, getting on with today's program, I'm really happy to be able to pass along this talk by Michael Garfield. It was given at the recent Moogfest that was held in North Carolina. Now, the last time that we heard from Michael here in the salon was when he and my friend Matt Palomary had their pre-end of the world conversation. Well, it was back a week or so before the world was supposed to end in December of 2012. Happily, we're still here, and now we're able to get to know Michael a little better as well. Now, if you don't know about Bob Moog, in whose memory the Moogfest is held, well, you simply haven't been paying very close attention. Because as the creator of the Moog synthesizer, he is, he's considered to be the father of electronic music. And Moogfest is the annual event that honors his remarkable vision and his amazing musical inventions that changed the course of music. And it was at this festival that celebrates the synthesis of art, music, and technology that Michael Garfield gave the presentation that we're about to listen to, the full title of which is Techno-Shamanism, a Very Psychedelic Century.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out here for Michael Garfield's talk. My name is Amos Gaines, and I'm a designer and engineer with Moog Music. And I just wanted to come out and briefly give a few introductory words. Michael is such a dynamic thinker that I'm not going to attempt to preview the direction that he's going to take us in, but I did want to talk for just a moment about Techno-Shamanism and what that means to me and how that connects to Moog Music and Moogfest, because there is a very real connection there. My background outside of Moog with Techno-Shamanism is about 15 years in the psychedelic trance music subculture, which is a global phenomenon that is very keyed into a techno-shamanistic approach to dance and music and ritual. And what techno-shamanism is to me is the thought that the shamanic experience is the numinous and the deeply personal and the trans-rational and the things that cannot be quantified scientifically that are an intense and real part of the human experience in the cosmos. And, just that is a, half of the duality of the human experience. I'm reminded of Isaac Newton, who, when he wasn't laying the foundations of modern physics, was a magician through and through. And neither of those aspects compromised the other. Rather, they completed parts of a whole. And in this modern era, we've very much gone with the Newtonian cerebral modality of interpreting reality, to the extent that a lot of times anything that can't be quantified and rationalized is viewed as deviant, crazy, unfounded, not real. And it's very important for the health of the human species to recognize that the numinous and the profound is every bit a part of the reality that we embody. And we should neither lose sight of that, nor should we lose sight of the empirical reality that lets us cure diseases and go to space. We have to have all of these things. And so Techno-Shamanism is the understanding that as the technology of our intellect has advanced, it is still wedded to the numinous and the profound, and that we can use that technology to help enhance the totality of human experience. The shamanic aspect of human experience, the infinite aspect of human experience, can be dialed in with this amazing new technology that we have if we use it with inspiration. And so the connection there with Moog and Moogfest is that is very much what Moogfest is helping to catalyze. That's part of the intention underneath it. And at Moog Music, we don't just make tools for playing tunes. We make instruments that are intended and designed to help create rich and beautiful, authentic human experiences. That's, the tone of these instruments resonates at a soul level. I don't think that's hyperbole. That's what we're going for, and to the extent that we succeed, it's intentional. And so that's where we're coming from with our contribution to technological culture, is to help create a more profound and real human experience. And so with that as the stage that we're setting, I'm going to turn it over to Michael Garfield. Thank you very much.
Well, that says it all, and I think we can spend the next hour in meditation. Just kidding. That was actually a very beautiful intro, and it's awesome. It's awesome to, being from Austin, Texas, I have to step lightly here, because what I want to do is express my appreciation for being invited to participate in a community of like minds and hearts in this sense, especially in contrast to some of the other large music and technology festivals in Austin that seem to have been swept under by the riptide of technocratic systems management philosophy that sprung out of this dissociated, we talk about Newtonian, but really it is just that like left brain Newton that doesn't get into the alchemy or the astrology or any of that, that doesn't attempt to put it back together with that right brain holism. So it's awesome to be here, and I also want to thank as a step along the path of ever deepening invocations that this talk seems like it will be, the spirit of Bruce Damer, who was a friend of Terence McKenna's, and I think for that reason, among others, namely that he's been a NASA consultant on asteroid mining and is currently involved in some very exciting origins of life research. He was initially tapped to give this talk, and I want to thank Bruce for saying, why don't you let this kid do it instead? I'm too busy with official science stuff, and I'm pretty sure he's unemployed. So thanks, Bruce. And then lastly, I have been on a complete binge of the work of former MIT historian William Irwin Thompson. I don't know if any of you are familiar with him, but he is sort of, I won't say the man behind the curtain, but he has been a profoundly influential figure in the last 60 years of Western thought and planetary thought. His Lindisfarne Association was for 40 years was the hub, or one of several hubs, for envisioning the planetary culture and a planetary renaissance, and what that means, the bridging of Eastern and Western thought, of modern and pre-modern thought, of artists and scientists. And it is absolutely on his shoulders that I stand here, not only in the context of the ideas that I hope to present, but also in terms of the means or the style by which he presented them. So I want to start and end with Bill Thompson quotes here for you guys, and I think that will appropriately bracket the whatever goes in the middle of that sandwich. He says, this is Evil in World Order, 1976. Very prophetic volume, I highly recommend. He says, to understand contemporary culture, you have to be willing to move beyond intellectual definitions and academic disciplines. You have to be willing to throw your net out widely and be willing to take in science, politics, and art, and science fiction, the occult, and pornography. To catch a sense of the whole in pattern recognition, you have to leap across the synapse and follow the rapid movement of informational bits. You treat in a paragraph what you know could take up a whole academic monograph, but jugglers are too restless for that. The object of the game is to grasp the object quickly and then give it up in a flash to the brighter air. Yeah. Ooh. So actually, Lorna Rose Simpson was the woman that I spoke to about coming out here. And she said, we already have this in mind. We want to do a talk on techno-shamanism. It's one of these things. And I said, I can't really tell from where I'm standing if you guys are aware of how problematic that is. It's, when we're getting into this issue of, seeing someone's culture from afar and then saying, hey, I like that. I'm gonna use that, and I'm gonna use it for my own purposes, and I'm gonna use it to inflate my sense of importance in a terrifying and disempowering society. And I learned to do this from that environment. And there's a lot of in the circles where I run, there's a lot of frustration with the word shaman to start with, and the way that it has come to mean not only practitioners of various tribal medicine traditions that do not call themselves shamans, but also the work of various heads on sticks walking around thinking that they're tampering with reality every time they smoke a bowl of DMT. And, putting that particular philosophical question aside, we are in this, we're like thoroughly at cruising altitude now with remix culture. And so there's a certain amount of like self-forgiveness I think is required for me to even get up here and like talk about techno-shamanism and pretend like, I am an initiate or, a medicine person. But one of the characteristics of the planetary culture that is emerging now through the decay of industrial and post-industrial civilization is the decay and the decentralization of the priesthood in whatever sense that arise, that we're moving out of a hierarchical structure of learning and into a system that balances natural hierarchies with peer-to-peer exchange, that we're sort of moving from this vertical descent of heritable culture, and we're moving into kind of a more bacterial model where things are being exchanged rapidly and laterally, and it's kind of easy to imagine how as we get more and more connected with one another, that more and more of what we identify as the self is subject to this boiling metamorphic exchange across peer boundaries. So in that sense, all of us are somewhat more responsible for the task of teaching one another and healing one another, insofar as one of the main walls that's coming down, like the Iron Curtain, I think, of our generation, is the wall between the self and our environment, between the mind and the body, between what we call culture or civilization and nature. These very recent and kind of problematic distinctions that were only a couple hundred years old. These are not the the distinctions that Newton was working with. When the work of natural philosophy was to understand culture as a microcosm of a larger process, and to understand individual purpose as an expression of cosmic purpose. But what Bruce said to me was, Michael, don't just rant at these people. He said, tell them a story. So the story that I want to tell you is about electricity, because I feel that in understanding what it would mean to be a techno-shaman, and specifically the subtitle of this talk was A Very Psychedelic Century, because I think that there's, in the same way that we can derive individual meaning from an understanding of the whole, we can transpose certain personal mythic cycles onto our collective initiation into this planetary renaissance, and understand what we're going through now as a species and as a planet through the lens or the model of the psychedelic experience, and specifically the psychedelic experience as a synonym or sister species to the near-death experience, in the way that Tim Leary and Richard Alpert originally articulated it, comparing an acid trip to the Tibetan Book of the Dead. So the story is like this, basically. Our earliest religion, and in some sense every subsequent expression of human religion, is anchored in electricity. And if you want a really thorough exposition of this, you can turn to Eric Davis and his book Technosis, Myth, Magic, and Mysticism in the Age of Information, which holds up admirably after 20 years almost now. But, you start by thinking about awe, like the kind of awe that I experienced watching Daniel Lanois last night, or the kind of awe that is created by the architecture of a building like the Carolina Theater, or a cathedral of any, under any name. And that awe is the awe of the tourist, because, the tourist looks up. There's a relationship in the body between where we're actually looking, and the way that our brains estimate scale. There's something, the same object in our field of vision appears much larger if we see it transposed against the sky versus on the ground. And so, for that reason, as well as for the reason that my roommate's dog runs under the table every time there's a storm, it's easy to understand why thunder and lightning was such a profound source of awe and such a profound portal into the mystery of our situation on this planet from the very beginning. And, that the earliest God that we can point to, the earliest named God, was a dragon. Tiamat was the dragon of chaos. Before we divided our world into sky and sea, it was just earth and chaos, and that this was the dreamless, slumbering beast that ruled over these terrains. And then at some point, we cut ourselves off from that. The Babylonians sent their hero god Marduk over to, slay Tiamat and establish civilization. And since then, for the last several thousand years, we've watched sort of harmonics or variations on this theme. That it's the symphony of our relationship to the other is getting more and more complex. And you can see this dragon sort of rear its head back up. I'm going to skip most of human history because it's irrelevant. In the 19th century, there's a film, Proteus, about the work of scientific illustrator Ernst Haeckel, who was charged with illustrating all of the creatures that were dredged up from the bottom of the ocean by the HMS Challenger expedition. And that expedition existed, that it occurred because in our attempts to lay a transatlantic telegraph cable between London and New York in order to transmit stock prices, we failed. We snapped the cable twice. And when we pulled it back up, we discovered that the cable was crusted with all of these things that we did not believe could exist, because at the time it was understood, or it was theorized, that the bottom of the ocean was too cold to sustain life, and that it was a sort of frozen wasteland, which, if you look at it, the kind of like ancient relationship that we have between the land and the chaos, between human society at eye level and the sort of unconscious beneath us underground, and the sort of transpersonal unconscious above us in the stars, that the bottom of the sea has always represented in the human mind our collective unconscious. And there's something really poetic and beautiful about the fact that it was commerce. It was this desire, depending on whether you want to be a cynic or not, it was either this sort of the necessity of business and the sort of military industrial survival drive thing, that led to ARPANET and stuff like that. Or it was our desire to connect with one another. We keep watching the video resolution climb and climb and climb because we get acclimated to a certain degree of intimacy, and we want more, because we are conceptually separated from one another, even if we are not separated in truth. And so the self that identifies that recognizes itself as separate is constantly trying to reclaim its unity through various rearrangements of the physical world. And so you get this thing where you start to see how the telecommunications and the electricity that flows through that system, the same telegraph messages that led to cybernetics, that led to an understanding that information is a difference that makes a difference. That there's this relationship between, if you want to talk about like the mouth of the dragon, commerce and consumption, and the heart of the dragon, which is this desire to, eros, like the erotic urge, the desire to weave into that ultimate unity. And that I point to that specific example, the transatlantic cable, because it seems like that's the moment that we can really say that was the inflection point, or the turning point, where the boundary that we had made for ourselves between the city and the wilderness started to digest in the belly of this dragon, which we can now recognize as the technological infrastructure that surrounds us in this building and almost everywhere that we go as modern people. I've been working unsuccessfully for the last 3 years on an essay entitled "Google is the Dragon," in which, owing to the work of Penn State information scientist Richard Doyle, who makes the point that the surveillance infrastructure that we have created is a property of it's a function of thermodynamics, in a sense, that like every camera suggests a new blind spot, and so every camera implies another camera, and in that sense it's a self-reproducing organism with its own agency, and that we are agents of that agency, and that it would be in that sense a mistake in the way that we imagine this throughout the whole of Christendom, to see the angelic and the reptilian as in contest with one another, when in a sense they're actually opposing muscle sets within the same limb, or opposing poles of the same magnet. That one of the predominant features of postmodernity is that we recognize that everything that we define ourselves against is tucked within that definition in such a way that that the more that we try to extract ourselves from the thing that we avoid, from the thing that we hate, the more it begins to manifest unconsciously, because we're no longer able to approve of it in a way that gives us any I won't say control, because that's nonsense, but that gives us the opportunity for a dance with this hidden part of ourselves. So there's, you see, to kind of summarize there, you've got the pre-modern dragon, which is the mystery of this electrical chaos of the skies and the oceans. And then we bury that for a few thousand years, at least in some cultures. And without even realizing that we're trying to dig this dinosaur back up, that we do so, and then find that we've actually been in the belly of this Leviathan the whole time, and that technology now surrounds our culture, that we're no longer holding the stone tool in our hands, that the stone tool has grown like verdigris over all of nature, and Amazon has been replaced by Amazon, and here we are inside the probably the fourth or fifth stomach of this thing, and as this process of connection continues, all of the boundaries that we thought we knew have been interrogated and challenged, and so we're coming to a moment where this is where the psychedelic experience part of it comes in, because let's see if we can, there we go. This is my friends in Austin made this music visualizer called synesthesia. I just thought it would be fun to put it on there. There might be you might slip into kind of a holistic pattern detection mind watching this, and that's kind of the hope that something emerges out of the intersection of the speaking figure, and the silent ground of this presentation, as I'm discussing the dissolution of the figure of the modern self into the ground of our collective experience. And so this is the template that was left for us by that first wave of psychedelic or techno-shamanic visionaries, people like Bob Moog, who saw electrical devices as a way of miniaturizing industry, bringing technology back into the human scale and back within the envelope of culture. And so what I see right now is that this template of ego dissolution in when you actually witness what's going on. The recent research on psychedelics and the brain show that when somebody takes psilocybin mushrooms, for example, that the ordinary partitions between different modules of the brain relax and stop inhibiting one another, and something that journalists have been calling an internet of the brain emerges, where suddenly all these new connections are thrown up. And for anyone who's ever experienced group telepathy in a psychedelic state, you'll identify that this is something that's occurring not just within people, but between people. And so this seems like a very useful touchstone for understanding what we have to look forward to over the next 100 years or so, as this embryogenesis of a planetary self rolls forward to completion. So so you get into this issue of well, how did the ancient world manage these experiences? Because in the 60s we didn't have elders. We just sort of found we like broke into our parents' music room and started playing with all their stuff, without any guidance or instruction. But as the severity of this situation amplifies, as we run up into the wall against which, operating in a modern mindset where the self is posed against a world that is dangerous and must be controlled, we're getting to a point, where it's no news to anyone here that we're about to drive this off of a cliff. And so what are we, or we may already be in free fall. And so what is the evolutionary adaptation to this situation? What seems to be going on is that now that we have the acid trip of the internet, those two things having been created almost more or less simultaneously in the late 30s, that you get this the internal explosion of the psychedelic experience and the external explosion of the atom bomb, which represents sort of the fruiting body of that mycelial web of military, industrial, research and design people that created cyberculture, and as a matter of consequence created counterculture, and in some sense are the progenitors, the grandparents of culturally of everyone in this room. Like, we are children of the Manhattan Project, in the sense that we recognize for the first time with the bomb that there is no over there anymore because of the radioactive fallout, and because of the co-implication, the accomplice action of different states that are ecologically and economically in bed with one another. Like, we can pretend for the sake of sensationalist news that it's the United States versus China or versus Russia, but everything is so connected to everything else now that you can't pull one of those cards out without the whole thing falling. And it was the bomb that taught some people that, and it was the acid trip that taught some people that. And and just as a point of passing, I think it's no coincidence that you talk about the electric Kool-Aid acid test, which tapping into this notion of the Promethean flame of the thunderbolt that allows an inspiration to spread through, from the celestial macrocosm and like down into these receptive individuals and then between us. So at any rate, these ancient cultures, pre-modern cultures, they had a way of managing these experiences, and a very old and wise system in place for how to open a window into these realms, the same, in some sense, the same realms that we're recapitulating with our portals, as we astrally project to one another by ever greater fraction. And that was the shaman, or whatever they're called, the curanderos, these people who took one for the team and recognized that their position within the social molecule was to act as a mediator, not as a priest, not as someone with exclusive access to this knowledge, but someone who is willing to serve an intelligence greater than their own for the benefit of their community. And you start to see this kind of language emerging in some of the early cyberneticists, namely Gregory Bateson, who became convinced through, even though he started out in the OSS in the Korean War working on using information science to create divisions in people, he had like a moral awakening and decided that what he actually needed to do was convince people that because thought appears in the interaction between an organism and its environment. Because the unit of selection, and this was my area of study in school, evolutionary ecology, that the people were arguing, for decades over where is the unit of selection? Is it the individual organism or is it the group? Well, that's an optical illusion. That it's everything is operating on everything else at the same time, and it's only by drawing a boundary around it for the sake of trying to create a controlled experiment that we create these artificial categorical distinctions. So, Bateson saw his classic example is a blind man with a cane feeling around, and he said, well, the blind man feels a truck passing outside the street through the cane. And it's like, well, where does the mind of that man stop? It certainly doesn't stop at the end of his hand, because the cane has become a sensory extension of his hand. But the ground has become a sensory extension of the cane. The cane is merely amplifying this other signal. And that when you actually look into it, and Zen master Genpo Roshi in Salt Lake City talks about this. He talks about big mind, and like where does big mind stop? Gregory Bateson called this the mind at large. And he said that because thought emerges in this relationship, that we are, in some sense, that there's an entire field of philosophy called material philosophy, where they study the agency of environments and landscapes and substances. Why is it that everyone in the ancient world was obsessed with rocks, right? Well, it's because they were animists. Because for them, spirit was not some hard problem that had to be solved. Spirit was the living and immanent reality of everything. And it is precisely this animism that Bateson and that Bill Thompson and so many other very sophisticated scientific thinkers are proposing is the direction that we have to move as a society in order to not only reclaim our dignity as human beings from the maws of this commercial monstrosity, but also as a humble scientific reckoning with something bigger than ourselves. It's a Copernican turn. Any kind of recent research. I'm sure a lot of you guys, we were talking about that this morning, some friends and I, about the kind of more popular theory that we're living in a simulated universe, and that there's like evidence at the subatomic level. There's like a granularity to the cosmos that suggests that it's being computed. And if that's the case, we're not the first universe, and like we have to go through this bummer in the same way that 500 years ago people were reckoning with the fact that the sun does not revolve around the earth. And in a sense, it's this humility which Kevin Kelly has said that science is, as we answer questions, we discover exponentially more questions. So we're finally at that point where we are back to recognizing that the process of scientific inquiry, whether that process is applied to quantitative data in the empirical external material domain or qualitative data in the phenomenological and psychological domain, that inquiry is not in service of some adolescent fantasy of total control, but is in service of the ever-deepening humility of our relationship to the cosmic mystery that we are. And so, this, for Bateson, this meant the participation in what he called, hyphenated, mind at large. And our efforts to connect electrically and photonically to one another are an attempt to reinvent the wheel, essentially, to rebuild this thing that actually lies, that we're embedded in, that's the water in which we're swimming, that's invisible to us. And so we've spent the last several thousand years going about the diligent task of reinventing the wheel, basically. But now we're at that point where it's sort of becoming obvious, and we're seeing, on the one hand, the dawning of the age of the Internet of Things. That our toasters are like talking to our security systems, and our security systems are talking to our doctors, and our doctors are machines in the same way that computers replaced a room full of women sitting at a table. And so that we've got all of these essentially quickened chips, these sophisticated crystals and quasi-crystals that we have, we've served the rocks in almost like a kind of a theosophical, mystical Rudolf Steiner kind of way of exalting and ennobling the mineral world. We're serving as the enzyme through which the metabolic transformation of the sleeping stones to the androids is being executed. And we are those things. So in a very real sense, we are just waking up. We're graduating to our participation in that alchemical act of creation. And so, like, as we're doing this, though, it requires that we've got to claim this creative power. And in order to claim this creative power, we have to see ourselves as not other than the creative power of the cosmos as a whole. And so in order to break down the wall between the ego and everything, you end up in this, like, a lot of people end up in this, very familiar kind of like acid burnout type situation where we simply, it's the Humphrey Osmond, the term psychedelic, to fathom hell or soar angelic. Just take a pinch of psychedelic, in his message to Aldous Huxley. And it's like this notion that by opening the trap door to the basement of our own minds, where we have repressed all of the powerful and mysterious stuff that we considered not us. It's been like fermenting down there for a few thousand years. New things have grown. And, it's in the same way I hate to say this, but like it's in it, the work of a healer requires a bit of, you got to keep your medical squeamishness in check. It is like lancing a boil or the purgation of participating in an ayahuasca ritual. Like we have to deal with this shadow material as a collective in order to survive this transformation. And that's where, again, we turn back to the work of previous generations in the 20th century, specifically the work of people like Stanislav Grof, who pioneered the field of LSD psychotherapy. Because it's only by recognizing, entering into conversation with, and then reclaiming as self all of this unconscious content that we're able to move forward as initiated wizards. That it's an elemental process of recognizing the ways that each of us is essentially a node between intersecting waves coming from every direction in our environment. We are something that the landscape is saying. That the entirety of human history can be understood as a thought expressed by the geosphere. And in that sense, when we talk about building the noosphere, that the internet, we're falsely conflating the systems that we're making in order to sort of take this gambit at reproducing our original unity, our intuitive, and the memory that we have of this unity. That again, it's like, when you zoom in on the Mandelbrot set, and there it is again, at 1,000,000 degrees magnification, that we're not actually doing anything new here, but it is new, and it is an opportunity for novelty in the sense that every moment is an opportunity for novelty. But so I do want to. I met a guy this morning that is actually a perfect example of this. This guy, John Keston. He's giving he gave a talk on audiovisual scores and is giving a talk on sonification. And he's an artist that improvises to environments. He just sits with like a musical sculpture, like listens to the songs of a creek or of a railway. Because ultimately the railway is a natural phenomenon like a beaver dam, right? Like we can all accept that there's no qualitative difference between the activity of human hands and non-human hands, except as a matter of degree. And so he sits there and he is actually listening to the voice of what I still can't seem to shake the habit of calling the natural world. And he's entering into a conversation with it. And so was the guy that was driving us from the hotel the other day. It turned out to be the head of some music academy here, and says he goes out on his back porch with the keyboard and he does duets with the birds, and he'll give them a little line and they'll repeat it, and then he'll play the variations on it. And I think that this as a model for the kind of sense of place and being, the kind of meaning that we make for ourselves in our lives in this age that's growing up around us is coming up. So you got like Android Jones, the visual artist, who does all digital work, but he says he defines himself as an electromineralist, meaning that he's helping this thing come up. So the Internet of Things and we're witnessing this like Furby move to our environments becoming more conversational. Amazon Echo. You talk to your devices now, and they talk back, and they're getting better. Like I got my girlfriend's text message in a rental car a couple weeks ago, and it was like, "I miss you," but eventually it'll sound like her, and that is sort of the bastardized version of what some of these post-industrial or meta-industrial cultures that have been springing up over the world in the last 50, 100 years or so, like Findhorn, or like to some degree like Arcosanti in Synergia Ranch in the Southwest, both of those, that these are places where we recognize that the way forward is animism, is acknowledging that the world is even without us, installing natural language, artificial intelligence, conversational interfaces, even without installing, mind-reading Kurzweil brain chips, is the world is already speaking. It's already responsive. And, the more that we recognize our own bodies as the confluence of these, as quickened dirt, as in this Bruce Damer's sense, really, very much back to that. The new model of the origin of life is very much back to that original model of lightning striking a shallow pond. If we are going to humanize a technology that now contains thermonuclear warfare, ecological destruction, and such subtler destructions as psychosurgery, electrical stimulation of the brain, aversive therapy, and behavioral modification, we will need more than the liberal humanism expressed in the implicit system of values of the behavioral sciences and the traditional humanities. This is the religion of Silicon Valley. Gamifying things, neuromarketing, using the research of neurotheology to stimulate religious experiences in people so that they like to go to work more often. The worldview of the liberal intellectual is a Marxist Freudian mapping of the outer world of society and the inner world of the psyche. But that sophisticated worldview does not contain the celestial and chthonic energies we need to appreciate the machine for what it is worth. To see technology in proper scale, we need cosmic consciousness. And that consciousness comes more often from meditation than from reading Marx or Freud. If we cannot humanize our technology with liberal humanism, we can with animism. And that is the importance to the contemporary world of animistic communities like Findhorn. If we can converse with plants, hear the spirits of wind and water, and listen to the molecular chorus singing the 99 names of God in the crystal lattice of the metal of our machines, then we can have the consciousness we need to live in a culture in harmony with the universe. Y'all are like brilliant people. I know this. This is like the most intimidating experience I've had speaking at a festival. And so I'm sure that many of you have something smart to say, and I'd love to hear it. Well, there's one of the things that I didn't get to in this talk, I'm glad you hit it, is that there's really kind of like two different magical schools in most world cultures. There's the sort of masculine version and the feminine version. And this is nod to Martine Rothblatt and her gender bendingness here. Male magical traditions tend to focus on the magician of the tarot, exerting one's own will, and that's through alignment to a greater will, even, not my will but thine, or, do what thou wilt, but the thou in this case is capital T. It's aligning with the God self. That's how magic is actually executed. And if you're not operating from that holistic identity, then you're unintentionally creating the very thing that you are trying to eradicate. That if you look at, for example, the work of techno-immortalists like Ray Kurzweil, you get into this weird situation where it is the Faustian drive to live forever that is creating this accelerating technological evolution that is posing an existential threat to the entire infrastructure and is also, in some sense, accelerating our experience of time to the degree that more and more information, more and more of the subjective experience of the passage of time is being compressed, almost like information entering the singularity. It's getting squeezed into a point, and so we get into this place where the attempt to live forever is actually creating a situation where even if we do master the human body and we find a way to make it live forever, we're going to be so busy like mutating ourselves on a daily basis, like we change clothes, that the issue of identity is like moot. Like who's left of somebody like Ray Kurzweil or Jason Silva when we actually get there? And in order to get there, it seems pretty obvious that the kind of the very self that's asking, who do I, how am I going to maintain control of this situation, is basically forced to dance through the crowd, because it's dancing through the crowd that allows the intelligence of the body to speak and allows you to actually get to the front of the stage, the front row with the minimum of effort. You have to jiggle at the same rate as all of those other grains of sand on the speaker, and it's like only through acknowledging that, which is actually the feminine magical tradition, which is much more aligned with expressing the will of the environment and, through alignment with natural cycles, like the lunar mysteries of menstruation and that kind of thing. Doug Rushkoff talks about this in the book Present Shock. He talks about how he was able to improve his word count and actually write faster and more effortlessly by keeping track of the cycles of neurotransmitters in his own brain associated with different phases of the lunar cycle. And he says that we can actually kind of sell this to business and say, look, your people are going to be better off if they're only doing this 1 week a month. And then the other 3 weeks, they're working on something else. And one of those weeks is just rest and relaxation, that we are not machines, So there's something in there. And I don't know if that gets at I don't know if that helps. But basically, it's like, Nisargadatta Maharaj said, it's not your desires that are the problem, it's that your desires are too small. Well, the reason that I volunteered to do a live looping workshop tomorrow, and unfortunately we all can't be there, I wish they just put them back to back, is that this is a problem. This functions pretty well for when it's time to listen to a this is like a vestige of like the university here, that I'm like sitting on the microphone and you all are not amplified in the recording, I have this problem with venues where I run a live looping collaboration residency in Austin, Texas, and the goal is to get people involved. The goal is to have everyone recognize that they are participating in the body of this thing that is, one organ is human tissue, another organ is modular electronic devices, another organ is the membrane of the room itself and the skeleton of the layout of that room. And in this particular case, the practical thing is leveling that, not in like an ideological way that says that this is wrong. There's obviously a place for the way that attention focuses on people and shifts. But like, for example, democratically, rather than electing termed representatives, we could delegate our votes to provisional bodies of experts that convene to address a particular issue and are basically appointed by the polis at large, and then dissolve once the issue has been addressed. So that we're not dealing with the impossible reconciliation of a very complex and specific set of global issues with the kind of like career political brinksmanship that seems to be involved in being a generalist political representative now. That there's like a new democracy. Are You Serious has talked about this extensively. Ken Goffman also have talked about, like what open source democracy or democracy 2.0 would look like. And like one of the things is, that you wouldn't even have to go to the voting office anymore. You get your like public ledger pin code, like Ethereum or like a blockchain type thing, so that you can't fraud the vote, and you can use somebody else's phone, so you don't get into like you kind of minimize some of the issues of technological access, and then everyone can sort of pass their own, rather than just blindly asserting, investing our own personal authority in somebody that cannot possibly address this. We say, what, actually, this person, I think this person should be involved in the panel that comes together to address this particular issue. And the swarm intelligence of the human species appoints the people that are actually most suited to it. That's like a political example. But I mean, and even in a personal example, I think it's more about learning how. Contemplation is probably there isn't a one way that this knowledge is going to express itself, and everyone here is going to like percolate on this, and it's going to take root somewhere and grow. And the next time I speak to you, you're going to have some amazing way that this knowledge of the permeable, ever more permeable boundary between who you are and what you want to do, and what your world is and what the world seems to want to do through you, is being. You have to support the mouth. Yeah, this whole thing about Occupy, the 99% versus the 1%. Why do you suppose that movement didn't realize its intentions completely? Because you can't cut the head off and keep the body alive. You can circulate blood so that it's never the same blood in the head, which is not currently supported by systems like capital, like lower taxes on capital gains than on labor, right? But the moral task, the psychological task in front of us is learning to identify with the whole, being a 100%er. Because honestly, like, how are we going to do this if we're not recruiting the 1% of people that have access to 40% of the resources? Like, are we really going to pull this off with like 2 of the 4 engines of this plane out? No, like, we need everybody on board, and those people are just as lonely and miserable as everybody else. So hug a billionaire. That's my solution for you.
You're listening to the Psychedelic Salon, where people are changing their lives one thought at a time.
Hug a billionaire. Well, since I don't happen to know any billionaires, I'm just going to have to pass on that, I guess. But if you do happen to know a billionaire, then, well, that's probably pretty good advice. I do think it's important, however, to do what Michael was talking about earlier and humanize our technology. But I think that we have to step very carefully here, because it seems to me that sometimes we humanize our technology a little too much. In particular, I'm talking about the field called artificial intelligence. Just on the face of it, that phrase seems strange to me. What do they mean when they say that intelligence can be artificial? And have you noticed that some people are now capitalizing those two words, artificial intelligence, as if we're speaking about a living, breathing person? Oh, I know what they mean, all right, but I think that they are seriously misleading people with that phrase because it's incomplete. What is being talked about here is actually artificial intelligence code. It's just code, my friends, computer code. And unless you're one of those mindless rubes who think that those morons on the U.S. Supreme Court are correct in giving full human protection to corporations, well, then you no doubt will never think of some computer code, no matter how sophisticated, as being anywhere close to equal in importance to the most lowly human being on the planet. I'll tell you when I'll buy into the concept of an AI being on the same level as a human, and that's when they can program a machine to have a full-on orgasm, one where the machine rocks and shakes and then goes to sleep for an hour afterwards. Until then, don't bother me with stories about machines waking up. And this is exactly a place where techno-shamans are needed. We need people who are aware of the metaphysical aspects of human life, but who are also deeply involved in technology and can hopefully prevent the masses from turning over their lives to a mindless, Borg-like existence. And for what it's worth, I think that somehow our species will always come up with those important people, the techno-shamans. For example, during the main LSD phase of the 60s, there was a day when the 5 men most responsible for synthesizing and distributing LSD got together and discovered that all 5 of their fathers had worked on the Manhattan Project, which developed the atomic bombs that the United States dropped on civilians in Japan in 1945. What are the odds of all 5 of those guys having dads in that program? What do you think? I'm not sure if that story made its way into one of my earlier podcasts, but it was told to me by my friend Nick Sands, who was one of the 5 people, and I think it made it into one of the podcasts with Nick. Now, back in the year 2000, a book was published that discussed ways in which the Internet acted like a psychedelic drug, something techno-shamans know quite well. I'd like to read a couple of short passages from that book right now. And I quote, "The day will also come when the expanded sense of awareness shamans and psychonauts seek in entheospace will be more widely experienced, for people will be using the portal of deep cyberspace, Cyberdelic space, to launch their minds into the unlimited realm of entheospace where Gaian consciousness exists. As more and more minds constantly jump in and out of entheospace, the possibility arises for order to spring from this chaos of mind. And it is this new order I see as the awakening of the noosphere. It is anyone's guess as to what form this new order will take. It might become manifest in a kind of super psychic awareness we all share. In essence, a true global consciousness. Should ever such a moment occur, it would be fair to say that that moment is also when the evolution of global consciousness actually begins. It does not matter that many people may hold different views, for ultimately the future we create will be a synthesis of many different points of view. What does matter is the part we each play in shaping the immediate future. For we are not just in a period of rapid change, we are in a period of rapid evolution. Cyberspace has revealed itself to be a great attractor, drawing our minds together into a cocoon of intelligence, knowledge, and light-filled fibers encasing the Earth. Perhaps in the not-too-distant future, the noosphere will shed its chrysalis, spread its beautiful wings, and take its proper place in the dance of the cosmos. With all of the commercial excitement caused by this new technology, we sometimes overlook the fact that a powerful new means of interhuman communication is evolving at an incredibly rapid pace. Like the clatter of souvenir vendors outside our historic cathedrals, the clatter of e-commerce can draw your attention away from the spirit-filled space you are about to enter. A deep layer of spirit is building within the Internet. Consciousness itself has taken hold and is beginning to expand inside of this great cathedral that is part human and part machine. Before our very eyes, the noosphere is taking root in the mechanical infrastructure we call the Internet, which means, in the final analysis, that you are the spirit of the Internet. For the spirit of the Internet is the spirit of humanity. The spirit of the Internet is your spirit. It's my spirit. It is human spirit in all its forms. End quote. As you just guessed, that book is titled The Spirit of the Internet, Speculations on the Evolution of Global Consciousness. And, I'm the guy who wrote it. It's available online for free in HTML format, and in Kindle format you can find it at Amazon for 99 cents. But if you want a paperback copy, and if you stop by my garage, well, I'd be happy to give you one of the 200 or so copies that I've still got left. But for now, this is Lorenzo signing off from Cyberdelic Space. Be well, my friends.